Leto Atreides II was named after his grandfather and an older brother who had not survived the Harkonnens' cruelty. Two Leto Atreides had already bled for Arrakis. Now the name fell to him, a newborn child fated for more than a mortal life. God Emperor Leto II is one of the central characters in Frank Herbert's Dune universe. Spoiler warning, this video will cover his life, covering details from Dune Messiah, 1969, Children of Dune, 1976, and finally God Emperor of Dune, 1981. If you plan to read the novels and don't want spoilers, now is your chance to click away. Born in the shadow of empire, his birth marked the end of one story and the start of another. He was Leto II Atreides, the son of Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib, heir to prophecy and the herald of a destiny beyond all reckoning. His path was neither simple nor kind, yet he walked it with a purpose that outlasted time itself. In the last moments of Dune Messiah, his mother delivered him to the world. Leto II arrived with his twin sister, Ganima, at the edge of a war-torn empire. Their father had reshaped the galaxy, but he was gone now, vanished into the desert. What remained behind was the promise of these two children, brimming with ancestral memory. They were too young to know fear, too young to know the burden they would carry. Leto Atreides stood beneath the glare of a desert sun, ancient voices crowding his mind. He felt the weight of countless ancestors shaping his thoughts, all of them living in his body. He sought solace in the open sands where a blazing sky offered no judgment, and every grain of dust carried its own history. Nights were the worst. Then, as he huddled by the dunes, a tumult of memories washed over him. He remembered how he once described it. Within his head were wars, uncounted lives parceling out their ancient memories, violent accidents, love's languor, the colors of many places and many faces, the buried sorrows and leaping joys of multitudes. Those memories hit hardest when dusk settled. He felt the press of other people's triumphs and failures as though they were his own. He shared this burden with Ganima, his twin sister, and together they watched their aunt, Aaliyah, fall deeper under Baron Harkonnen's foul whisperings. He understood the risk of prescience, how it had once crippled his father, Paul Atreides. He told Jessica, who had come back to Arrakis with suspicions of Aaliyah, "Ganima is you! She's you to such an extent that your life holds not a single secret from her up to the instant you bore our father. And me, what a catalogue of fleshly recordings am I?" He made it plain he would not sit idle while danger brewed in the imperial house. He refused spice trances, and so did Ganima, for they both knew that to lose themselves in the swirling corridors of time was to risk abomination. He dreamed of a place called Jacurutu. He spoke to Ganima of a strange figure known as the Preacher, who roamed the sands pronouncing cryptic truths. Leto said, "I've dreamed myself enclosed in armor and racing across the dunes. I must find this man they call the Preacher. I must find him and question him." Ganima guessed their father might still walk the dunes. "It'd be just like him," she said, though neither of them was certain. Leto simply replied, "I don't like the things I know I'll do. For the first time in my life, I understand my father." Real quick, if you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and drop a comment on your thoughts on the God Emperor. Now back to the story. Jessica, the twins' grandmother, had returned out of concern for them. Leto confronted her with burning honesty. "Think of me as your Duke Leto," he snapped when she tried to dismiss him as just a grandson. He accused her of meddling in the sisterhood's breeding schemes, of letting Aaliyah and House Carino exploit old secrets. Jessica bristled under his words, but he forced her to see he was no mere child. She listened to him say, "Do I follow the Atreides mystique? Do I live for my subjects and die for them? Or do I choose another course, one which would permit me to live thousands of years?" His questions were not idle boasts. They revealed a path he was already shaping. He had to flee Sich Tabr when Aaliyah's threats grew too bold. Stilgar, loyal as ever, helped him escape into the desert, and Jessica agreed to let them feign Leto's death. On those windswept dunes, he kept searching for Jacurutu. He encountered a mysterious stranger who seemed to know his every thought. The man accused him of being a walking surfeit of others, of seeking death because he was full of ancestral ghosts. "You think yourself educated, but all you are is a repository of dead lives," the man said. Leto tried to defend himself, but the stranger struck him down into unconsciousness with a single touch and a mocking chuckle. When Leto woke, he found himself prisoner to Namri and his band of Fremen smugglers. They forced him into a perilous riddle game, where a wrong answer meant the cut of a crysknife. Namri hinted that he was the Iron Hammer, the one who stands at the gates of paradise, demanding each traveler's proof of worth. Leto answered each question with guarded cunning, aware that Namri tested not just his knowledge, but his resolve to live beyond the weight of his ancestors. In that place, Gurney Halleck appeared. He told Leto, "I follow your grandmother's orders. Your education has been planned to the last detail." Halleck carried a primitive injector full of blue spice essence, designed to push Leto into a prescient trance that could rob him of self-control. Leto's body recoiled at the thought. He knew how easily those visions could bend him. But Gurney insisted, saying, "You must go through it. Otherwise, what your father dared, and you dare not, would hang over you for the rest of your days." Leto seized another path. On the open sands, he found the worm's larval stage, sand trout, and let them bind to his skin. Each step of the metamorphosis burned through him, fusing man and creature into something new. He recalled with clarity how the worm had exhausted itself in the night-long dash northward, and how Leto could sense the alien cilia reaching into his flesh, changing him. Already he felt less human, but he pressed on. He thought, "You saw this, Father," and rejected it. Yet Leto would not shrink from what he called his golden path. He came upon the preacher at last, that blind man whose bearing seemed all too familiar. Leto greeted him, "Auckland, Wasaklan?" But the old worm beneath the preacher refused to budge any closer than 10 meters. The preacher asked who stood in his way. Leto replied, "I am Leto Atreides. Your worm stopped because I commanded it." A hush fell. The young Fremen guide called Leto a demon, but the preacher knew better, and behind his still-suit mask, he trembled at this fate he had once glimpsed and feared. In time, Leto brought Stilgar into his confidence. He spoke of a coming typhoon struggle, a terrible convulsion needed to save humanity from stagnation and extinction. "It's that or humans will be extinguished," he said. Stilgar heard the cold steel of truth in the boy's voice. Leto told him how Paul, once Muad'Dib, had turned away from this future, leaving the desert open for Leto to master. Stilgar, with the unshakable loyalty of the old Fremen ways, gave Leto his trust. All that remained was the final showdown in Arrakeen, where Ghanima waited and Farad'n of House Corrino hovered on the sidelines. Leto now appeared as part man, part living stillsuit. Ghanima spoke of him as Kralizek incarnate, the embodiment of final conflict. She told Farad'n that Leto ran across the dunes without rest, as though he meant to outrun his own soul. Farad'n, unnerved by these Atreides, asked, "Must I remain scribe, the secret father of your royal line?" Leto's command was firm. "You must." And then, "I'll make it official. I will give you a new name. From this moment, you'll be called Breaking of the Habit." He claimed Farad'n's Sardaukar legions, forging them into the new era he intended to create. He settled the betrothal matter, for Atreides' blood would continue, the Bene Gesserit plans would be satisfied, and the Empire would bow to his vision. Through that chain of decisions, Leto II transcended the boy he once was, forging his own destiny. In the end, he claimed the desert and every memory it held, wedded to his new existence like worm to sand, convinced he could carry humanity along a path it never knew it needed. Lucky for us, it wasn't a Game of Thrones situation. He bound himself to Ghanima as spouse in name alone, unable to father children himself, but knowing the Atreides' blood must endure. Through Farad'n, that union produced new branches of Atreides' heirs. By the end of Children of Dune, Ghanima, though forever joined to him by royal decree, chose a mortal lifespan. In time, she left him to rule alone. Her death would haunt his journals for the next 3 millennia. Now we move on to the journey in God Emperor of Dune. No longer the boy who had walked beneath Arakeen's sun, he was God Emperor Leto II, a being of vast girth and impossible age, fused with the sand trout skin his father had once rejected. More than 3,000 years had passed since he first accepted that alien flesh, letting it cocoon his arms and legs until what remained of his human form was sealed away. "I began this account in the first year of my stewardship," he said of himself in his journals, "in the first throes of my metamorphosis, when I was still mostly human. Now, in the present, he towered over all humankind, holding them in a peace enforced by his control of the spice melange. To keep absolute sway, he banned Holtzman shields, dangerous to him in his worm state, and drove Mentat academies into hiding, ensuring no single intelligence system could challenge his own knowledge or prescience. He bound former Sardaukar legions to his Fremen warriors, forging them into one iron force, but time wore them down. They grew fat with peace, blinded by his unquestioned rule. When he saw their soft edges, he cast them aside, breeding a new army, an all-female legion called the Fish Speakers. Across the face of Arrakis, only a small desert remained, guarded by harsh dunes, and called the Sarir. Everywhere else stretched rivers, forests, green fields, an empire that was fed and policed by the God Emperor's will. "They come hat in hand and petition me for melange," Leto wrote. "I dole it out as a reward and hold it back as punishment." It was how he kept his power. The fish speakers, an all-female army loyal to him and to no other, enforced his word. Few dared question this worm who could neither be killed by normal weapons nor aged by the decades. And so for thousands of years, there was Leto's peace, an uneasy quiet that lulled the universe into a fearful slumber. But no peace was ever truly quiet, and part of the trouble always came with the repeated arrival of Duncan Idaho Golas. Each Duncan served for a time, loyal to the Atreides name, then learned a dangerous secret or suspected a hidden betrayal, and that old rebel's heart would flare into rebellion. Idaho had learned that the Tleilaxu were making another Duncan. Leto observed, noting how fear of replacement seeded each Idaho's downfall. Yet Leto took comfort in these Duncans. He enjoyed their candid anger, needed their honesty. They stood as reminders of all he had once been before the desert fused itself to his flesh. Others also tested him, none more cunning than the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. Leto knew they itched to reclaim the breeding programs he had seized and manipulated to his own ends. Well, the Bene Gesserit are all more than a little insane, he once told Idaho, but madness represents a chaotic reservoir of surprises. Some surprises can be valuable. He knew they wove new faiths on Giddy Prime, invoked half-remembered myths about Jessica and Aaliyah. He confronted the Duncan about it, revealing that behind every cult and rumor lurked the Bene Gesserit quest for more Reverend Mothers, more spice. Leto almost admired their audacity, if only because it reminded him no one was ever fully safe or content under his reign. Nor could he leave out the Tleilaxu. They threatened him, banking on the original cells of Duncan Idaho in their axolotl tanks, believing the God Emperor would never destroy them so long as they held that genetic leverage. They even dared send face dancers to assassinate him. When an attempt ended in public failure, Leto's anger flashed. They think I will not destroy them because they hold the original cells of my Duncan Idaho, he said. They approach being wrong. Then he demanded fresh uniforms, a new canopy for his cart, and the continuation of his procession as though nothing had occurred. Those close to him understood. He was not simply arrogant, he was prescient, and he refused to let any plot distract him from the path he had traveled for millennia. All the while, Leto felt a stirring of a different sort when Hui Nori came into his life. She was the new Ixian ambassador, and she radiated a kindness and intellect that shook his ancient soul. She reminded him of her uncle Malki, whose wit and cunning had once amused him, and he suspected Hui was crafted in some Ixian breeding experiment. Even so, he found himself smiling more in her presence, comforted by her poise. "Then you do not hold it against me that I killed your ancestor?" he asked. Hui answered without guile. She knew her ancestor had tried to assassinate him. The honesty in her eyes soothed him, but he never forgot this was a game of design. Her existence was no accident. He had orchestrated it, just as he'd orchestrated so much else, keeping secret the reason, to force himself into confrontation with the only emotion he had left untested: love. His court reeled when he chose Hui as his bride. Moneo, his major domo, a head servant, usually responsible for coordinating the household of their master, roared in private that the Tleilaxu's rumors would be believed. Leto dismissed him with a cryptic remark about how mortals wrongly demand perfection from their gods. Only the old pantheists had the right idea about deities, he said, mortal foibles in immortal guise. The marriage would shake the empire. It would spur fresh dissent and confusion, precisely what Leto required to keep the wheels turning on the path he had chosen. Yet the key to that path lay not in Hui, but in Siona Atreides, a young woman endowed with a genetic quirk that made her invisible to prescience. Leto saw in her the final puzzle piece of his golden path, a future where humanity would at last break free from every tyrant's vision, his own included. So he tested Siona, forced her to cross the Sarir alone in his presence. "You must find a way to live in the presence of the worm," Moneo told her. The silence and emptiness of the sand ate at her senses. Leto guided her across dunes that crumbled underfoot, letting the desert's ancient power erode her pride. Only when she understood that terror and faced it would she be ready to become the seed of humanity's true freedom. All of it, his endless reign, his transformations, his manipulations, led to one final moment, the day Leto allowed himself to be killed. He called it his last pilgrimage, venturing into the place where his fate would be sealed. There, Siona and the rebels struck. They unleashed everything at him. He did not resist. He understood that with his death, the last great sandworm would vanish from Arrakis, and the surety of prescience would shatter. History is a constant race between invention and catastrophe, he'd once told Hui. Now he put his own existence into that race, freeing humankind from stagnation and from his all-seeing tyranny. When he fell, his immense body cracked open, and the sand trout scattered to find new lives in the dust, carrying within them the hope of the future. Siona would guide a changed universe, one that stood on the edge of infinite possibility. The God Emperor's final sacrifice ended a 3,000-year captivity of humankind's destiny, flinging open a door no tyrant could ever close again. Leto's golden path, sealed with his own death, would become a legacy of freedom meant to outlast the last echo of his tread upon the dunes. They say each worm carries a shard of his mind, tiny pearls of a vast consciousness. In those silent depths, the old worm sleeps and dreams. Some swear he still nudges fate from within the shifting dunes, guiding the universe even in death.